If no one else can help, and if you can find them, maybe you can hire the A-Team.
I love it when a plan falls all apart.
What plan do you speak of, Mr. Aldridge?
The one where all of this stuff works properly at the beginning.
Oh, that plan. I love that the air sound, the guitar riff kind of thing that comes through when you hit the computer wrong. That came across really well on the radio.
I'm glad I don't have that sound in Windows being programmed to be something objectionable or what's a you know what I mean?
Yeah, offensive.
Offensive. That's it. You know what is offensive?
Well, lots of stuff, but
in the story today, Politifact who claims to be unbiased, who claims to be nonpartisan.
Inject snicker here.
Yes, I find that offensive. But they're now claiming in one of their stories that Republicans lie more than Democrats, and they have the numbers to prove it.
You know, we were talking before the show, and we've had a fair amount of experience dealing with Politifact, not just indirectly dealing with Politifact. And you have spent hours debating back and forth with the Politifacts.
Well, and it's not really a debate. The way that works, and we'll talk about this later in the show. We got a lot to talk about today. But the way that works is, when I was working campaigns for E.W. Jackson, is they'd find something he said, and then they'd send me an inquiry saying, can you prove that? Because we think such and such and such and such, and we're going to do a story on Politifact about it. And, you know, they're just hoping to put his quote up and stick that little truth meter next to it and say, lie. Actually, it's false. So 4 times I had to go toe-to-toe with them in proving that something Bishop Jackson said was absolutely true.
I think you were 4-0, weren't you?
Well, we're going to talk about that later in the show. But it's just disgusting that they portray themselves in the way that they do.
Yes, and we're going to talk, because it's a very interesting conversation. We talk about media bias, and people will laugh and joke and say, "Wow, you know, this is the perfect example of how this works in the real world."
Yeah, and just to be clear, because we haven't said it in a while, we say it a lot, but we haven't said it in a while. The News Guardians are not unbiased.
No, we're not. We are definitely partisan.
I don't know if I'm partisan, but
I'm partisan for freedom. I'm partisan for the Constitution. I'm partisan for liberty.
Okay.
I'm partisan for the truth.
But you're not partisan for a party, which is where that word comes from. And we're not going to hammer on Politifact today because they've said something bad about Republicans. The point isn't that they say Republicans lie more than Democrats.
My initial reaction was that might be true.
Well, I don't know, and I'm betting they don't know.
Well, the way that they did it is insidiously it's intellectually dishonest. Yeah. The way they did it.
So we'll talk about that. Also, you may not have heard about this. Chip found this story this morning, and I was enlightened to this by Chef yesterday, as a matter of fact. But there is $600 billion with a B, $billion missing out of the federal treasury. That is more than $500 billion missing.
Not only that, but there's a story that I think is a companion piece to that where over half of the internal auditors for the government are complaining that they can't get cooperation to do audits on the finances.
Wow. So we'll talk about that this morning. And then the first story, this is breaking news of the situation over in Iraq. Chip, what do you got for us?
Well, I'm sure you've all seen the story about the president authorizing airstrikes in Iraq. Now, I can't necessarily think, I'm not actually, I hate to agree with the president on something. On this one particular issue, I think he's right. I think.
Well, maybe it depends on what happens. But what's going on?
Well, basically, they're the ISIS group that's been having big strides in Iraq.
I thought ISIS hung out with like Captain Marvel.
No, ISIS, the Islamic States, they're trying to put the caliphate. You know the thing Glenn Beck always talked about, and people laugh at him.
Didn't they have the Captain Marvel ISIS hour back in the 70s?
They did. I used to watch it a lot, but this is a different ISIS.
Not that ISIS?
Yeah, this is an all caps ISIS.
Oh, okay.
But they were attacking towards Baghdad and making good progress, and then they got stopped. So now they've turned their attention to the northern part of Iraq, which is
the Kurds.
The Kurds.
Yeah.
And there's a large Christian minority in that area. There's several cities that are almost entirely Christian. So they are basically moving into those areas with the decree that they've been talking about for some time now, that Christians in Iraq either have to convert, they have to pay a tax, a heavy tax, like a huge percentage of what they make, or they're going to be killed. And basically, they're going to be converted at the point of the sword.
Well,
and there's plenty of video of, now, you're always very, and rightfully so, jaded about this sort of thing, but it's usually the truth when the victims are complaining about the treatment and the oppressors are bragging about doing the same stuff that they're complaining about. It's not like ISIS is trying, like the Nazis.
So both sides are saying, "Yep, it's being done."
Yeah, I mean the Nazis and the Holocaust were trying to hide the fact that they were killing the Jews. They tried to keep a clamp on that. ISIS, they brag. I mean, they put out promotional videos of them killing people, and this is what we did. I mean, if anything, they may be overstating the thing, but they're not afraid to. I mean, there's videos of them summarily executing Christians, one after the other.
So what of all the stories, because I did see a story, and it wasn't connected with the president has decided to drop bombs, but which I think is amusing, by the way, because our guest on Tuesday was telling me how his perception was that Republicans wanted to bomb the world into submission, and here we have a Democrat president talking about dropping bombs again. At any rate, the story I saw was like hordes of Christians cowering on some mountain.
Yeah, basically they've taken over the main city that these folks lived in, and they basically have all fled, and they're staying on the mountain. And there's also a bunch of U.S. military personnel, not direct combat folks, but it's like support staff and trainers and things like that. They're kind of caught up in this. So the president has basically authorized airdrops of food and supplies to those people and airstrikes to protect them in case the ISIS folks come and try and attack that mountain where they're hiding out, basically. That's oversimplifying it, but that's essentially what's happening.
So, what if the president's bombs fall on the mountain?
Well, I know that you're convinced that President Obama's goal is to help the Islamic fascists win, and that may or may not be true.
Just without getting caught doing it. He's not going to do it openly.
So, but, you know, I certainly... It's about time somebody did something to help these poor folks, because they've been attacked, oppressed, and you know the what's so funny about this whole thing, and this goes back to the Bush administration. You know, the Bush administration overthrew Saddam Hussein. The Obama administration overthrew Muammar Gaddafi, who were ruthless dictators. And they've replaced them with ruthless dictators who are as bad or worse.
Oh, they're worse. The situation's worse.
You know, in both cases, both Gaddafi and Hussein, for their own selfish reasons, were good or better to, or treated at least fairly, minority groups, Christian minority groups in these areas, because I think they're just trying to keep the lid on the dissent. But now that all that is completely out the window.
Well, Saddam actually chemical bombed the Kurds in the north.
But it wasn't a religious thing. It was because they were trying to rebel. So they did it. When it came to Christian minorities, actually was relatively... I mean, he was cruel and a dictator, but he only did it for his own political good. He didn't have like a... So
he kept a lid on the warring factions fighting amongst each other.
Basically. I mean,
to the degree they are now.
This is not to give Saddam Hussein like a halo. He's a terrible guy. He's just... We get involved in these things, and we take a bad guy out and replace him with a worse guy.
Well, here's a question, then. What would Ron Paul do here?
Well, Ron Paul wouldn't,
Would Ron Paul bomb ISIS to protect the Christians cowering in those mountains?
Probably not. He would say, I think Ron Paul would say that we don't have any role in there, and it's not our place to get involved. And I generally agree with Ron Paul, because a lot of the stuff that's happened in Iraq and Libya, the bad stuff, is a direct reaction to us getting involved in stuff we shouldn't have got involved in the first place. But when you make a mess, we've made the mess in Iraq. I think we're sort of obligated to at least. We've got our own U.S. military personnel in that area that we're trying to protect. I think we do have a right. I think we have an obligation to at least help those people because we've pretty much screwed the pooch. Pardon my French, but we've done it. We've done it. We've screwed it up there. We've got some responsibility to at least. And I don't know what the end game is there because there is no end game. Those people are going to. They're going to be killed or convert. Well, we can't airstrike them forever. We can't protect them on the mountain forever. There's no end game there. Either have to leave Iraq or they're going to be killed.
Well, I asked that question not because I would just do whatever Ron Paul said. I asked that for two reasons. One, because Ron Paul's Minute is up next in the show. But also because... Ron Paul's been very critical of a lot of our military exploits around the world, and his criticisms has drawn the ire of people who think that
he's crazy.
Right, because he wouldn't deal with problems that are necessary to deal with because of national security. And see, here's why I think they're wrong. See, since Ron Paul is not the president and doesn't get to know what the president knows, Ron Paul really doesn't have any way of knowing what's really going on with most of these things, except for what's reported and what he can find out because he's a member of Congress. But I firmly believe that if Ron Paul had been president, that he would have done a much more thoughtful, careful, respectful, common sense decision on every one of these things. And I felt like he wouldn't have just put up walls and said, world be damned, and we're not getting involved. I think what we would have had is somebody that would have used serious thought, common sense, and care in deciding what warranted our attention and what didn't. Somebody honest dealing with it, rather than somebody who's been co-opted by the interests of someone else. Most of the time is international banking interests. So... While everybody, even Ron Paul's followers might not have liked that, because, let's say that 15 opportunities to get involved in a shooting war around the world popped up on his watch, he might have found that 4 of them were necessary.
Right.
And the Ron Paul people, either they would have just gone along with him because he's Ron Paul, or they would have gone absolutely nuts because Ron Paul was now doing the very thing that they thought
Ron Paul is right in general that we should be very, very, very judicious in use of military force around the world. He's absolutely right about that. But that's not an exemption from using military force, basically.
No, it's not. And I think that's where Ron Paul is misunderstood. We are the News Guardians. I'm Greg.
I'm Chip.
We will return and talk about Politifact.
This is going to be the best segment of the year.
Oh, this is going to make the week, and I'm glad it happened on Friday. So don't go away. We'll be right back.
News Guardians on Fox Radio 910.
Welcome back. This segment of the News Guardians is brought to you by Bramilton Computer, home of the $50 Does It deal. Whatever you need done to your computer, they will do it for just $50. Labor is always just $50. So, got a virus? They'll eradicate it and fix your computer for $50.
That's very violent. They're going to eradicate it? Wow.
Right. That's what you do to a virus. You don't play around with that stuff. You need to have all your data backed up and restored, $50. Windows crash on you, $50. Whatever the problem you're experiencing, his guys will get on it, and it's $50. They are conveniently located right next to Advance Auto on Bramilton Avenue. Bramilton Computers, don't forget to tell them Chip and Greg sent you, or you heard it on Fox Radio 910, but make sure they know how you got there. So, Politifact. You're gonna love this.
Well, and it's one of those things. I mean, their name sort of screams, we're this arbiter of fairness, and we're going to get the facts about politics.
Well, first we're gonna delve into the claim that's being made now, and this is a story that comes to us from addictinginfo.org. It's an article written by Carrie Ann. And she says, the Nonpartisan Center for Media and Public Affairs at George Mason University has released findings from a new study that reveals Republicans are significantly more likely to lie than Democrats. Now, in the first sentence, we already have issues. First of all, they're not nonpartisan. That's a misnomer. To make that claim right out of the box, that's only done so that they can personally lend more credence to what it is they're saying, because obviously it's more true if they're nonpartisan, right?
Absolutely.
This, reading again, this isn't the first time such a study has been completed. The university released a study last May which found Republicans were 3 times as likely to lie as Democrats. But what this study distinguishes are 2 very important trends. Number 1, Republicans are more likely to lie than Democrats. Number 2, the credibility gap between Republicans and Democrats is actually widening during Obama's presidency. Now, they're going to claim that it's widening in favor of Democrats.
Of course.
But anyway, this is how they did this. You're going to love this, Chip. You are going to love this. Using data gathered by Politifact, the study compares the veracity of 100 statements involving factual claims made by the 2 parties at different periods through the lifetime of the Obama White House. In the first 4 months of President Obama's second term, 46% of the claims were made by Democrats and 54% were made by Republicans. Okay, here's the first problem here. This is just 46 and 54% of what Politifact reported on, not the total number of claims made by representatives of each party during that period.
I mean, Politifact makes it sound like they check every claim of every politician.
Every word that's ever said.
So
no, they didn't. This is just 100 things they chose to cover.
And I am certain that their liberal bias on choosing the stories had some, not to mention the fact that what they claim is a lie, what they claim is the truth.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that.
It's not always.
And we can talk about that because we have directly been involved with Politifact on a story they were writing that we were involved in.
Stories.
Yeah, we've got 4 of them. Anyway, reading further on this is how they did this. It says that 32% of those Republican claims were false or pants on fire, while just 11% of the Democrat claims were rated that way. Now, maybe that was because they selectively chose what to report from Republicans and Democrats.
And based on our experience, that would be
the case.
If that was the case, if we hadn't been so active in working to make sure we held them accountable to what they were supposed to be doing, we would have had pants on fires for some of our stuff too.
Well, and if we take the race that the very last time we dealt with them was during the lieutenant governor's race last year, Ralph Northam claimed essentially that parents' sin was what was responsible for
that
children.
Should have been a double pants on fire.
It should have been. They didn't rate that, but it was absolutely false when Ralph Northam made that claim against E.W. Jackson, but they didn't rate that. Instead, they chose to rate whether or not E.W. Jackson's claim that homosexuals were sick was false or not, which we're going to talk about.
That never got printed.
Oh, and we'll talk about why
that didn't get printed.
So, reading on in this, it says, while Republicans have been breaking every code of conscience in efforts to link Obama to a series of scandals, they have actually widened the credibility gap. Their percentage of false claims has now risen to 60%. Now, this is what the editor at Politifact says in response to this. Politifact rates the factual accuracy of specific claims. We do not seek to measure which party tells more falsehoods. The authors of this press release seem to have counted up a small number of our truth meter ratings over a few months and drawn their own conclusions. We've rated more than 7,000 statements since we started in 2007. We are journalists, not scientists. We select statements to fact check based on our news judgment. Whether a statement is timely, provocative, whether it has been repeated, and whether readers would wonder if it's true. That's what the Politifact guy says. Now, this is the conclusion that, based on what he just said, that is drawn by the writer here, who is Carrie Ann. She says, quote, so it's official. Republicans lie more than Democrats.
I mean,
how is that the conclusion of what the guy from Politifact just said?
How can you... that story is so indicative of what we found with Politifact.
Yes. We've got to go to break now, but when we come back, we are going to tell you about the 4 instances where Politifact contacted us because Bishop Jackson had made a statement that they thought was untrue, and they wanted to write a story about how untrue it was, and I had to go toe-to-toe with them, basically having a fact argument to prove that what he said was factually accurate.
And they grudgingly accurate. It was hilarious.
We'll tell you when they chose to print the story. We're going to tell you what stories those were and why, and we're going to tell you about the ones they chose not to print and why they chose not to print them. When we return to News Guardians on Fox Radio 910.
This is News Guardians. News Guardians.
I love your show, man. It's great. We just need to talk about it.
On WFJX, Fox Radio 910.
I was momentarily diverted from what we were focusing on and about to get off on a tangent.
I'm glad you weren't tangential.
Well, actually, now I've gotten on a tangent about the fact that I almost got on a tangent, which is a tangent in and of itself. So I might as well have just gone on that tangent because this one means nothing.
Well, the fact that you're tangential is tangential to this conversation. Let's get back to Politifact, and because I really do think people will find it interesting, our interactions with Politifact, because it's really indicative of the media bias that's inherent in the system. I mean, I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but when you see it up front, when you experience it, when you live it like we did, it becomes painfully obvious the media bias that's out there, both obtuse and sort of in the background.
Well, we'll go back to the very beginning. This is the very first interaction I ever had with Politifact. And it goes all the way back to when Bishop Jackson was running for the United States Senate. He made a statement that says, in Galveston, Texas, they had, and this is from Politifact. This is their quote, and we're not denying he said this. I recall it. In Galveston, Texas, they have allowed people to privatize part of their Social Security, and people are building wealth. That's the quote they have. Now, he actually said a lot more. What he was saying was, what he said further on was that you can't build wealth in Social Security. Social Security is not a plan that will allow you to save, preserve, and then have later on the money that you've accumulated for your retirement. So he said that. Within a couple of weeks of that statement being public, I got an email from Politifact wanting us to justify that because they didn't think it was true. Now, at the time, they wanted us to justify two claims. One was that in Galveston, Texas, not only did they allow people to not to be in Social Security and to use that money in their own private retirement, but that they were actually getting better returns than Social Security was returning. That was one of the statements.
A lot better.
The other one was that you can't build wealth in Social Security. Now, we bantered back and forth, and I sent them the related information from Galveston, Texas, showing that they had indeed been exempted from having to be in Social Security, and instead were putting that money into their own private retirement plans. I also gave them the numbers on it. I researched and found the numbers to show what Social Security was returning for people that had retired during that time period, and what the private retirement plans for those people in Galveston that weren't on Social Security were returning, and showed they were doing a lot better than the people on Social Security. And I also, I settled those two issues, and then they wanted to go after me on EW's statement that you can't build wealth in Social Security. And they were adamant that they finally had us on that one. And then we went round and round and round, and it finally came down to me finally getting them to understand that no matter how much money you put in Social Security, you are never going to get $1 back that you don't get politicians to vote to give you. Because it is not a system where you have ownership of what you've put in. You put it in, the government now has ownership of it, and whatever they decide the law is, whatever Congress comes up with in the budget and the president signs, that's what you're going to get back. And that has no bearing on what you've put in. except in whether or not they decide that it will through legislation. And they got that. So they did the story. Now, this is the interesting thing, is I had them over a barrel on all of them. We were absolutely right. What Bishop Jackson said was absolutely correct. So here's what they did. They decided not to publish the question of whether or not you can build wealth in Social Security, because I guess they didn't want that information out. They did not want to do a story telling people what I had just proved to them.
What you choose to talk about is important, and bias is what you talk about, how you talk about it.
So they threw that claim out and never made it in. They chose only to go after whether or not Galveston, Texas had allowed people to privatize their Social Security, which was the most meaningless of the three of the things they were attacking E.W. Jackson on. This is the one that was absolutely meaningless. I proved them wrong on all of them. And I guess they wanted to print something. And since I had proved everything true, they printed the one that was the least damning to their liberal ideology.
And they gave it like a partially true, too, didn't they?
No, this one they actually put true.
Okay, good.
So their statement is, E.W. Jackson says Galveston has privatized a plan in lieu of Social Security, and they say that's true. That's not what they were trying to prove untrue. That statement was not why they contacted us, and was not what we were arguing about for 10 solid days. It took me to prove to them that what he said was absolutely true. They just picked the least damning to their ideology to print. So I was 1 for 1, or I 1-0, basically.
Yeah, we did a lot of research on that one too. I mean, it was I remember it well because we kept having to go back, look at this up, and dig this up, and
because they kept thinking they had us. They kept asking questions, thinking that they were going to come up with something we couldn't prove, and
we spent a good deal of time. Like, I mean, and it wasn't that hard. I mean, it was time consuming, but it wasn't all that hard.
No.
And the thing about it was they could have found the same information we found. I mean, it wasn't like we had some kind of magical inside scoop on what was true and what was not true. They had same access to the Google searches we did to prove that they were wrong. But they didn't want to prove that they were right or wrong. They wanted to prove what they wanted to prove. And when they couldn't, it was interesting that they actually put that in there. And if I remember the article, they tried really hard within even though it's true, it's still, different, and Social Security is so wonderful.
Well, and that's what we're going to talk. That's what we're going to talk about next. Is our very next interaction with Politifact. We're now 1-0 against Politifact, and now the bias inherent in the story is the truths that they neglected to put into the story because they didn't want you to know. They didn't want you to know that people in Galveston were actually getting a better return from their private retirement than Social Security was returning, and they didn't want you to know the truth about whether or not your Social Security money belongs to you. So they didn't report on that at all, but we did get it true, so 1-0. So the next question Politifact contacts us about was when, this is during the Lieutenant Governor's campaign last year, and EW made a claim that in 1960, most black children were raised in two-parent monogamous families. And today, we only have 20% of black children being raised in two-parent monogamous families. And with that statement, he said the thing that affected that situation most was the welfare state. The biggest change in these communities that happened as a result of government interference and interaction was the Great Society. And so the conclusion drawn there was that the Great Society, the welfare state, is actually what affected this situation. So here we go. We spent another week giving them the charts and the graphs. I mean, I used data from the government's own statistics office, from the government's own health department, the sources that I know Politifact constantly uses to prove what they're saying. I used their own sources to prove this to them. And here's what they did on this story. They decided that the question they were going to publish was, E.W. Jackson says 20% of black children are being raised in traditional married households. And they gave a begrudgingly mostly true.
And boy, if you read the article, it's like it had to pry that mostly true out of them.
Well, and in this story, in this mostly true rate, it's true. Unless everybody who measures this statistic is all lying to us, then it's true. But from Politifact's perspective, they didn't say it was mostly true because they don't believe the numbers. They actually reprint the numbers in this that prove it's true, but still didn't say it was true. They found a source who I believe is this guy was
he's a liberal professor.
Yeah, that works at the Pew Research Center.
Who's not biased or anything.
No, but the funny thing is that they interview him and they put him in here, and he actually supports it and says yes, it's true.
But
no, he's not the one that said but.
Oh, okay.
They used him to prove why it's only mostly true, and his comments actually prove that it is true. It was paining them to have to put a story out that was true. So what they decided to do was just say mostly true, because they didn't disprove that as a fact. It was true. There's no doubt about that.
And, of course, they left out other pieces of the conversation that you had that led to that. That would have been even more damning to the position they had.
Now, if these two situations... So now we're 2-0. We're 2-0 against Politifact. And I actually enjoyed getting one over on them, because the facts matter to me. The truth matters to me. And I believed in what I was doing, working with Bishop Jackson. So I was really pleased about having pulled this off. Then we got another communication from them, not very long after, and we will tell you about the third interaction with Politifact when we return to News Guardians on Fox Radio 910.
News Guardians on Fox Radio 910.
And we are back for the final segment of the fastest hour in radio, the News Guardians on Fox Radio 910.
So a lot of times what people don't understand is that the biggest bias that the media demonstrates is what they choose not to report.
Correct. What they choose to leave out. And this is an example of that. So we got our third inquiry, and I'm feeling it at this point. We're 2-0 against them, and I was a little angry after the mostly true that they gave us, because that was bull. It was true. We proved it was true. They knew it was true.
They just didn't want to admit it.
They just didn't want to admit it. So a trend has now begun. So they decided to go after EW again. And this communication was asking the question of EW to prove that gays and homosexuals are
sick.
Are very sick people.
That was an easy one to
That was
dispute.
very easy, because I replied back, he didn't say that. And so they sent me, I said, unless you've got the recording or the article that he wrote or writings, I know that he didn't say that. Now I knew where they were trying to source this from. Or I assumed I knew. I just didn't want to give that to them until I saw what it was they were going to use for a source, because I didn't want to open up a can of worms.
Yeah, this didn't take a lot of research.
No, this one was simple. So they sent me back a transcript of a radio interview that EW did with an activist group that fights against overzealous gay rights demonstrators. And in that discussion with them, they were talking about the worst of the activists, the homosexual rights activists that actually break into churches and spray paint the walls and artwork and desecrate sacraments, spit on priests, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, those people, he said, were sick.
Yes, and he said that those people are very sick. But what the media did immediately after we won the nomination last year was to publish that story and say that what he was saying was that homosexuals were very sick people, which is not what he said. And that got repeated in news. In news, if you look that up, you will find dozens of news outlets that reported that he said that. He did not say it. In fact, I got retractions from 2 news outlets. One was the CBS station up in Northern Virginia, and one was a newspaper, and I can't remember where it was from, but it was also from the same area. Both of them redacted. They went onto their website and they removed that from the story and told us that they were basically taking that back. Twice I got that. Now we didn't get it from the other dozens that did it, but I was I was ready to
But
make
a story on PolitiFact rating that claim as false would have been interesting.
That would have been very helpful, because then it would have stopped the ability of not only the media for the next 4 months to say that EW had said that homosexuals were sick people, which they used throughout the campaign. It would have also made it a little harder for Ralph Northam's campaign to talk about EW in those ways either.
Imagine, so why would they not do that, Greg? Why do you think they would, they were interested enough in the story to get you to try and,
I sent them back the recording, because we tracked down the people that EW did the interview with. I got a copy of the recording of that interview and sent them the segment where he specifically says, and you can tell what he's talking about, is the activists, not just homosexuals in general. So you know what they did?
What'd they do?
They never printed the story.
That's amazing.
We didn't even get a story out there where they said sort of true, half true. They just didn't run it at all and pretended it never existed. I think they owe me on that.
Well, why do you suppose they decided not to run the story?
Because they wanted to use that narrative in the gay community throughout the campaign, because they knew it would be hurtful and help their...
You mean there's a bias in the media? No. Tell Dan Casey it's not so, because Dan is a conservative bias in the media. It's just so funny.
So we don't get credit for that one, but no. I call that one a 3-0.
Well, yeah, because they didn't run the story that said it's totally true he hates gay people and they're sick and twisted people. He didn't say, because it didn't say that.
No, he didn't. But you are hard pressed to find people that.
Well, what's the last story?
I'm trying to remember what the fourth one was.
Oh.
I hoped by the time we got through the first three that I would remember what number 4 was, because it came right on the... Oh, it was the yoga one.
Oh, yeah.
So things were quiet for a few weeks, at least with PolitiFact, but not with the regular media. So the next thing I get contacted on is the EW, their claim that E.W. Jackson said that yoga leads to Satanism. And they have this in quotes. Another one, and this
totally out of context. That was easy, too.
This one was very easy to debunk, because they're sourcing it from his book. And in the book, he doesn't say yoga leads to Satanism.
He completely doesn't say that at all.
He has one chapter in the book that talks about, it compares and contrasts Christian prayer and Eastern meditation. And it talks about Christian prayer being the filling of oneself with the Spirit of the Lord, and Eastern meditation being the emptying of one's spirit of everything. And what he says is that he feels it's very dangerous to completely empty yourself,
because Lord knows what's going to fill it
because you don't know what's going to...
That is standard Christian philosophy 101.
Yeah.
So, but he did not say that.
No, he did not say yoga leads to Satanism.
Now, when you debunk that, did they run a story saying that the claims that yoga was Satanism was a pants on fire lie?
Nope.
Never.
And you know what happened after that? They never contacted me again.
Yeah, because they never contacted you about whether the fact that
he hates crippled children.
That never got even asked.
Nope, they didn't ask me about that.
That was a lie. It was just as much of a ball-faced lie as all the other ones were.
So your News Guardian, Greg, is 4-0 against PolitiFact.
And PolitiFact, so don't let the name fool you. Now, we just got a couple minutes left, Greg, and I did want to talk about this transparency website.
Oh yeah, hit it.
Because it plays into this. Because, again, it's about what they don't report in the media. So you would think this would be a big story. $619 billion on, this is not some journalism. This is the government's own transparency website is missing $619 billion that they can't find. Billion. For more than 22% of federal awards, the spending website literally does not know where the money went. 22%. The place of performance of federal contract was most likely to be wrong. Not only that, but there's another story that's out there that over half of the internal auditors for the federal government are complaining that the Obama administration won't give them the information they need to audit internal agencies. Now,
and why is that not on the front page of the New York Times?
Well, that's a very good question. So, Newsbusters did a story. Only CBS thought the story was important enough to even mention. So instead of covering the missing $619 billion in taxpayer money, Good Morning America showed video of a farmer in Kansas serenading his cows by playing the song Royals on his trombone. NBC's Today spent nearly 3 minutes discussing the supposed controversy surrounding a new Kim Kardashian mobile application. On top of it all, earlier this year, the State Department said they lost $6 billion. They just lost it. They don't know where it's at.
And they admit that?
Yes. So, now, again, I'm just saying, if President Bush, now I am no fan of President Bush, don't get me wrong, but if President Bush had lost $600 billion, do you think there might have been a story about that?
It would have been the news for weeks until they impeached him. Or he quit to keep from being impeached.
If half the government agencies were complaining that the president refused to give out information about this stuff, don't you think there would be some kind of investigation? Don't you think there would be some crack investigative team talking about what they're doing with all that money? How it's being funneled to Halliburton or to right-wing rebels somewhere in the world or something? I mean, there's no curiosity where that $600 billion went to. That's $600 billion is a lot of money. I mean, that's like a significant amount of money in the budget, even our budget.
Well, and demonstration of that, let's look back into the Bush administration. You remember when unemployment went from like 3.8% to 3.95%? And they reported for a solid week about how unemployment was rising and the economy was crashing and everything was horrible because unemployment went up 0.15%. But when unemployment continued to rise, point after point after point after point under Barack Obama, they didn't report
and when
that.
It dropped down, again, all these numbers being falsified and meaningless, but when they dropped down, then it became, he's saving the economy with his great efforts. What exactly did he do to keep the economy going? Well, I can't tell you, but he gets credit for it.
And that's the issue. And that's why the News Guardians are here, because you need to know what the media is telling you.
Don't trust what the media says blindly. If you do, you're leading yourself down the primrose path.
All right, before we go, I got to tell you that we got a message from Joanne in Virginia Beach who says, "You were mean to me yesterday while I was gone. See you on Monday."